All right, day number 2 with Dani, and it is back. Cannot tell you how excited I am. Let's get it. All right, as I said, day number 2 here at Elite with Dani. She's in town from Texas, and our main goal was her just to fix everything with my back. So if you watched this video, it shows all the stuff that we did as corrective exercises to really get me good and warmed up. Do you want to speak about that a little bit for this video?
Yeah. So I want to give a big intro to that, and then again, Chris is going to need a couple of correctives. Most of what I was looking at there was just to allow me as a PT and as someone who wants to see Chris succeed, just get a good baseline for where his body's at, how much it's going to change and things like that, because ultimately something Chris and I both agree on is that you got to train. And one of the biggest things we see people they hold themselves back by trying to keep things too pristine and too perfect. But you can always modify your training to work with whatever rehab you need to have done. We did that a lot with Chris today and just cleaned up a couple of his movements.
Agreed? Yeah. All right, exercise number 1 is gonna be straight arm pull down. So the huge takeaway for me with this that she taught me was opening up at the top. So really letting everything on that upper back go and go towards the machine and stretch my lat out. The change that made during this set was extraordinary for me. So we did a few warm-ups, a couple field sets, and then into the work where it was actually a drop set. So as many as I could, drop it to 80, and then as many as I could. And that really had my back pumped. I'm gonna let her talk about that opening of the back and what she was cueing on.
So one of the biggest reasons that I was really, really picky about Chris being able to open up is that for him to get full back motion, he has to be able to move his scaps or move his shoulder blades. So the cue that I gave him in the straight arm pull down was actually to think about reaching a little bit at the top. That upward rotation is really necessary to not only get good back contraction, but to get full shoulder flexion. If you want to contract your back, you have to be able to flex your shoulder. So if you can't get into full flexion, you're not going to get the full contraction.
Exercise number 2, another one that she just absolutely overhauled my thought process and my positioning. So with this Swiss bar pull down, sit back on my back of my glutes, really get that lower rib sunk in, and then as I got down into contraction, think about raising my chest and squeezing my lats. So this was huge. This will take a lot of practice. I'm gonna watch this back every time I do back and make sure this form is spot on, because what it did for my lats in terms of pump and feeling them work was extraordinary. So do you want to talk a little bit about that rib cage?
Yeah. There's a lot of nuances here. If you have questions, leave comments. We'll get to them. The interaction is great. But for Chris, one of the biggest things I wanted to see for him again was full scap upward rotation. That can't happen if a rib cage is flattened in the back. So for him, I actually had him lean back a little bit and let the weight pull him into a little bit of flexion, which allowed that upward rotation. So for him, the ribs, one question he asked was, you mentioned basically like depressing them, right?
Yep.
And that's a very, very big differentiation. So I want to make sure that it's crystal clear that when you're training, if someone gives you the cue to train or pull your ribs down, we don't want you to depress from here and basically close down on your six-pack muscle or your crunch muscle. That changes the shape of the shoulder. It's helping you create curvature from the side, but it does it artificially rather than by really changing the shape, the actual cylindrical structure of the rib cage. So for Chris, the cue that I gave him was just on his lateral ribs, making sure that especially at the top, he's in that eccentric and pulled back, that these are sunk down and in a little bit without depressing his whole sternum or crunching forward.
That feeling and sensation was very foreign and nothing I'd ever done before. So a huge region that in my mind, like if I can fix this and get strong and this become a habit or ingrained in my muscle and memory and body, I'm just gonna grow.
For people who have a hard time getting full shoulder flexion, again, this is where the training becomes the rehab. Chris doesn't have full shoulder flexion, but we also know he's going to train. One of the best ways you can recapture a little bit of expansion on the back, which again is the curvature, is by letting the weight create it for you. If you're someone who's historically trained and you're really, really tight in the back, really flat, good luck getting anything opening up without having a significant amount of load. Now, obviously, you're going to have to control that. There's caveats to that. You want to be smart about how you progress that, but overall, that load, that eccentric and letting the ribcage shift back, that is his PT and his training.
Single arm pull downs. Now, I have honestly never done this the way she set this up for me. When we finished regular pull downs, she was like, hey, Chris, I want to show you this single arm motion that Dave and I do. And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. Because I'm always down to learn new things and try new experiences. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to say my impression. Like, this made my lower lat cramp. And I've never felt that deep of a connection and contraction to it. So if you could just talk to the camera about everything you had me do to set up for it, and I'm just going to be quiet and learn.
So for Chris, the big thing I really looked at was moving forward off of what we did with the neutral grip where I had you lean back a little bit and really let the weight help you with some scapular rotation. Now, I think an important caveat here is that if you're looking at really, really capture full length through lat, teres, everything, too many people make the mistake of just putting traction on the shoulder joint rather than looking to keep like a 2% contraction on the muscle. So as that muscle is lengthening, you never want to be just throwing traction at the shoulder joint at the top. You should have the tiniest baby, like 1 out of 10 contraction at most, to make sure you're still protecting joints. But the other thing that did was basically allow him to continuously proprioceptively feel the lat. The one thing that we really had to make sure was happening was that he was getting full contraction, full shortening. Biggest mistake I see people make with this movement is stopping maybe an inch shy of that full elbow down movement, and that last inch of motion is, I think, where the money is.
That last little bit in supination.
So I really, really drove supination in for him, and part of that is because we're trying to recapture the external rotation. For full shoulder flexion, you need a little bit more shoulder external rotation and scapular upper rotation. Scapular upper rotation and shoulder external rotation are coupled together. So we want to make sure he's really being able to kind of drive down into that movement, and he needs external on the end range too. So one cue I use for people often with that is really driving through the pinky. People are so attuned to the thumb and forefinger of our hand because that's kind of what we use in life. I mean, that's what makes us humans. We have a thumb. And so, especially for people who live in a kind of internally rotated upper body world, most of us need a little bit of extra cueing to get that pinky side really engaged and really get that supination, external rotation, and drive that elbow down hard. That's what's going to allow you to really hit that lower portion of the lat, get it fully contracted. We also looked at a little bit of ribcage position here because I want to make sure he's not, again, depressing, but he's also not allowing the lower ribcage to flare out and go floor in. So I don't want him overthinking. I never want anyone overthinking, but if you have the big picture concepts of, hey, maybe I should not have my ribcage, moving from here to Timbuktu within 1 rep, that's probably a good caveat to go off of, or a good pillar to move off of.
All right, up next is gonna be the Sac Row. Now, what's really interesting is I knew doing this, I could lock in and pull the stack as you see me do here. Like, but at the end of the day, like, she had a big thing to me. She's like, Chris, I think you're just too damn big for this machine. What I want to think about here is this may not be my best option, right, in terms of rowing.
Yeah.
And even though I'm good at it, that doesn't matter because just because I'm good at it doesn't mean it's growing my back. So we did do one work set here, and we just ultimately determined this wasn't for me. Any feedback for you, Evan?
Yeah, I think if you're choosing any sort of a chest-supported row machine, there are two things that I think people need to look at, and that's primarily clavicular width, meaning how wide or narrow you are from shoulder to shoulder, and if the machine prohibits you from getting a full reach and full, like, allowing your scaps to rotate forward, and also looking at the trajectory of the arm path. So for Chris, he's too big for this, and the reason why is that even though the pathing on the machine is straight, for his body, relatively from start to finish, it's converging, which is going to get him in a lot of elbow flexion, a lot of front delt actually to finish the movement. So even though the path looks straight, you have to look at how the motion is relative to your body and your structure, because that's ultimately going to be the path of the weight.
On to what I will always say is this is truly my bread and butter. Single arm dumbbell rows, they feel good. I'm able to really stretch and open my back up and then drive up to contraction. So with this, we just had some fun here. I worked up to the 140s. I think I pulled them just north of 10, and that felt good after all the stuff we had done where she had exhausted the shit on my back. But with this dumbbell row, like with all that upper back lat work that we had already done coming into this, like I was happy that I could still pull that weight and pull it fairly explosive and aggressively. So again, as we talked about, like we got to have some fun. For me, that's fun, and it works my back simultaneously. So we did get to tinker around with hers a little bit and fix your form. So I'll let you talk about that.
I think what's really cool for me as a big nerd, but also meathead about working with you is that we use a lot of the same cues for different reasons. And so for me, I was not getting a full reach or full protraction at the bottom. That protraction is going to be coupled with trunk rotation, which again, the start of the session, the first thing we talked about was trunk rotation for posing for Chris. I have a hard time with trunk rotation. He gave me a cue about letting me really reach. It felt like I was reaching across my body, but really it was just to midline. Yeah. And then we looked a lot at making sure that I was getting a full length and a full contraction via foot pressure and the change in foot pressure. So different portions of the range of motion, you're going to want to use different foot pressure, whether it's on the ball of your foot or a little bit more lateralized, depending on where you're driving force production, where you need counterbalance or counterforce.
The great thing about that is that simple little fix for her, because she was only missing every third rep probably. In my mind, what I always think about this, like if we do this weekly, and if you're missing every third rep, how much more growth can we milk out of this singular motion?
Sure.
So it's like what I always say, like little shit adds up, and instead of missing 3 reps a set, now we're adding 10 reps a workout, and then guess what? That means your back's bigger, thicker. So that's what we want. Good. 8, 9, and stay heavy on that left foot, right foot, sorry. Right foot. One more, no trap. There, good. And that was it, guys. We didn't do any lower back today. I'll do that in a few days, so I'm not too worried about that. What we did for my upper back is all we were after today, and plus I'd kind of put a hard cap on her to restrict volume and intensity a bit. So at the end of the day, for me, I learned a ton. Biggest takeaway to any of you guys out there, if you're coaches, if you're trying to learn things, like you can't shut your brain off to learning. I mean, her and I both collectively been doing this for, 4 decades probably? Yeah. And I'm always one to say, hey, I'll shut the fuck up and just listen. And that's the way I did today, right? Is she told me to do things, I executed them the best I could. We worked through it, and I feel like I'm walking away from this session knowing ways to improve my back. So thank you. The past 2 days have been incredible for me. I hope they've been that way for you.
Yeah,
if you just want to speak a bit about what it's been like the last couple days to train with me, and then we'll wrap this baby up.
For sure. So I think Chris hit the nail on the head. As coaches, there's always so much more to learn, right? Chris is an incredible wealth of knowledge, and for me, again, having a medical background, having competed in a lot of sports between powerlifting, bodybuilding, it's hard for me to hand over the keys and just kind of say, Chris, I will do whatever you tell me to do. And the amount of knowledge this man has absolutely blows me away. And I think that one of the good markers that I noticed, especially in working with him, was how good he was at judging and assessing what weights I needed to use and when I was done, things like that. Right now I'm in a phase where I'm in a pulling out of a whole phase, and we're having to keep my volume and intensity low. That's, as an athlete, I think a lot of people are like this. They want to go hard, and it's really hard to know if you're still doing enough if you're not hitting, failure and everything. So I hope in some of these sets you guys can see where Chris basically, he pushed me, but he also knew exactly where to pull back. And I learned a ton mechanically. I'm a much better coach for spending time with you. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
The only thing I want to say here, because I think a lot of people might watch this session and be like, that's what you call back off for her? And the answer is yes. And there's levels to this, right? Her body was in an absolute state of fragility, for the better word of anything. We had to manage it and be intelligent with it so that she can get back to doing what she loves. And that's just 10 out of 10. Trashing her body and recovering from it, right? That's what we have to get to, because at the end of the day, right, she's an Olympian athlete, and that's where she has to train to. That's what her competitors are going to do, and that's what I expect her to do when her body is healed and right. So right now, it's learning, it's tightening some things up, it's slowered pace a little bit. Her and I were more between sets talking and teaching, as opposed to normally when she comes in again, you see her on film, hopefully with me, it will be zero talking other than, I need you to do this, 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 go, now, execute, motherfucker. And that's a big different scenario. That's what we're gonna get back to. But if we don't manage this properly in this phase, it's gonna take a lot longer to get to there. So again, I had to be really smart and instinctual watching her body. I knew when I could have probably given you multiple force reps. I could have dropped your weight and done more drop sets or whatever, fill the blank, to make you go harder and to milk more out of that muscle, but that's not what you need right now. So I have to, if anything, that's really hard for me, because I want to get in here and just drive her into the damn ground. But I have to remember that's not what we're here for. Not right now. That's a later date. And
Trust your coaches.
Yes, yes.
Trust your coach.
Because I'm not emotionally tied to her training where she may be.
Yep.
I say may, that's a joke, right? She's definitely tied to her training, as I am, right? If someone came in here and said, Chris, you got to leave reps in the tank, I'm like, I'll see you in December when it's time to train hard again. I really want you to watch this video, watch all these cues, learn from what Dani's teaching you, what I'm teaching you through this video, and at the end of the day, right, this is how you level your back up. You have to take a step back and say, hey, every other muscle is blown out on me, except for my back, so we have to fix that. So you look for people who are smarter than you, and that's what it is. So until next time, like, share, subscribe, Christmas TV.